Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Coffee and HEMA, where I try and make a point about HEMA within the time it takes to make a coffee. As I mentioned last week, if you have interest in me talking about anything particular, there's a link in the description of this video that you can use to submit a topic for request for me to talk about. But today's topic I want to talk about is concussions, and kind of why concussions are particularly kind of insidious type of industry in HEMA compared to some other injuries that we might see. And I'm sure most people know, at least at a high level, concussion. It's essentially your brain has become bruised either from a sudden impact, or your head has been moved very suddenly, whipped backwards, whipped to the sides, or perhaps even from a fall, and also sometimes from repeated impacts to the head wouldn't individually cause a concussion, but they happen over and over again. They can also lead to a concussion. And they're pretty bad, right? It's a brain injury. So, to say it mildly, pretty bad is kind of an understatement. You definitely want to avoid them. And they can have both kind of short-term issues like kind of confusion, dizziness, not knowing where they are, which could, if fenced with, potentially lead to other injuries happening on the back of it. And particularly, one of the worst things about concussions is if you have one, another one is more likely. So, if you've already got a sort of a mild concussion and you fence and you get hit in the head again, severe concussions to have lasting, if not permanent effects, that can go on for months, can occur, right? So bad stuff, basically. You do not want a concussion. And they are unfortunately, they're fortunately not super common in the sense that, it's not even like you would expect in a tournament for somebody to get a concussion, once per tournament. At the same time, they're not super uncommon in that you wouldn't be terribly surprised if someone got a concussion in a tournament. It would be one of the things that's sort of expected to happen. Again, you wouldn't expect it to happen through regular drilling or anything like that, but there are some things that people do that could contribute to that. But there are two things that make concussions particularly insidious for HEMA. The first is that, and in both of these regards, this is how they're kind of different from other injury. And the first is that concussions often happen when there's been no equipment failure. Our fencing masks largely are not designed against concussions. They're designed for much lighter blades with much more flexible blades. The structure of the front of the mask does mean that blades can slide off it from a thrust, so it reduces the risk of your head being pushed back. So it does help reduce concussion that way, unless you tip a sword with a soft tip that then sticks to the mask. But by and large, other protections are either not designed or have ambiguous effects on whether they will reduce the risk of concussion, particularly mask padding, both in and outside. Some people think that it will increase, some people think it will decrease the chances of a concussion. And there are arguments for either one that I will get into today. But in short, even if none of that equipment fails, a strong blow or a blow that catches it the wrong way and pushes the head back or pushes the head to the side could still cause a concussion through a perfectly functioning set of equipment. Right? The mask does not have to cave in. In fact, the mask caving in will probably reduce the chance of concussion, increase the chance of a bleeding injury, but reduce the chance of concussion. And that makes it particularly problematic. The other problematic aspect of concussions is that they are much less obvious than other injuries that should stop the fight. Or stop someone from fencing. So, a broken finger, okay, maybe a very mild break, you might not notice if you pump full of adrenaline, but you'll notice it pretty much straight away. Broken skin, I've had 2 cuts to my hands that obviously stop fencing straight away on those ones. A bleeding injury to the head, again, it happens, you've got to stop fencing. Whereas a concussion, especially in the early stages, can be quite difficult to identify, because people, the kind of symptoms you expect are kind of being slightly dazed and confused, not necessarily, sensitive to light and that kind of stuff. But a lot of the things, and headaches are common. Right? Headache is another common sign of an early concussion. A lot of these things are happening from people who are pumped full of adrenaline and dehydrated. And fighters in particular who are pumped full of adrenaline are very bad at recognizing these symptoms in themselves. So you have a tendency for people who have either concussions or sort of mild or early stages of concussion to think that they can keep fencing when they really shouldn't, because as I mentioned before, the biggest risk from a concussion perspective is if you have a mild concussion and you fence on it, you're more likely to get a severe concussion. And then the final one that people always forget in the subject of concussions, right? We always think about the big hits, right? Big heavy hit knocks your head back, very obvious concussion risk. We tend to forget about the small stuff. So repeatedly striking to the head hard, but not individually hard enough to cause a concussion, can start to build kind of concussion symptoms, and in particular then lead to the kind of risks that I've already described. It sounds a bit weird to say that, but the most common situation for that one is if you are drilling with a mask and gloves, right? People will strike to the mask because it's the protective bit. And it's important that we remember when we're drilling, we're striking to the mask because the mask is there to sort of to stop an accidentally too hard strike from being worse than it should be. It's not an excuse for striking hard. It's still the person's head in there. It's not a pell. So we need to be careful, in particular in HEMA, about concussions because of our protective gear not really being geared up, pun intended, to solving it, the insidious nature of it, and how the symptoms overlap with things that we would expect, such as effects of adrenaline, effects of dehydration, effects of exhaustion. And we need to be conscious that the practices that we're implementing, both in training in terms of repeated hits to the head, or in tournaments where heads are incentivized as a target for lots of things, do not contribute to the concussion risk, because it's one that we really need to manage very carefully. Problem with doing these things pre-coffee or pre-second coffee, if I'm honest, because I can't do anything pre-first coffee, is I forget important things. So to add to video filmed yesterday, although you'll be seeing it today, the most important thing from a concussion perspective is that you go out and you educate yourself about what a concussion looks like in somebody else, right? As I mentioned, people are really bad about recognizing that they've been concussed. They need external help to do it, whether that's from a medic, the tournament director, the judging staff, just their friend on the sideline. Everybody in HEMA should know what to look for in a concussion in their friends, so that you can tell your friend, no, you're done, stop trying to power through, you're going to cause yourself a permanent injury. So everybody watching this, go out, go read about concussions, go learn about how to recognize them, go learn about the symptoms, so that your friends don't do themselves a permanent injury. Thanks for watching, and do your best to not get concussed, because I have been, and I can confirm it sucks. No further research is required.